only been once this week.
What?
I've only been once this week.
Only been once? Oh.
I haven't been my best self this week.
Yeah.
This is awesome.
This is how we're going to
Exciting.
be. Henry, thanks for coming.
This is exciting. All of my devices seem to not disturb.
Microphone?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Test.
Yep.
Awesome. All right, ready? All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Roy Benke Internal Medicine Grand Rounds. This will be our second week. The lights are on this time. Last time they were off, so we're trying to vary things. We have a wonderful speaker today in Dr. Alex Ramirez. Dr. Alex Ramirez is our chief of endocrinology at the James Haley VA Hospital. He's an assistant professor at the University of South Florida, Morsani College of Medicine in the endocrinology division. Dr. Ramirez graduated from medical school in Columbia and completed his internal medicine residency at Seton Hall at Trinitas Regional Medical Center. Came to USF for the first time in 2010 to complete his endocrinology fellowship. His fellow during that time was Dr. Natalia Regales, who is our USF program director. So small world that their careers are already crossing. Little did they know that they would be spending most of the next 15 years working together. Dr. Ramirez, after he finished endocrinology fellowship, went into a short venture into private practice where he was excelling. He was the director of diabetes and endocrinology for the Carrollwood Hospital System, which is now Advent Health System, when I was able to snatch him up and bring him back to USF in 2014 to join our developing endocrinology faculty at the time where Dr. David Vesely was retiring. Dr. Tony Morrison was slowing up a bit on the USF side, and we needed a faculty teacher to come in and motivate residents to want to learn endocrinology and several to go into endocrinology. And several of them are here in this audience who became his fellow, to include Omar Santana and Carlos Palacio. And what a great faculty we have with Dr. Jeff Krischer as our division director, both at Tampa General and at the James A. Haley VA Hospital. Dr. Ramirez has worked on CSP trials looking at diabetic monitoring. That includes the insulin pumps, and he has become an expert in diabetes technologies. And we are just absolutely thrilled to have him giving grand rounds today. And I love the title, an AI Odyssey, meaning an autonomous insulin Odyssey. Everybody from Allergy Immunology got excited that it was a second straight allergy immunology talk. So as you see, it didn't work. They're not here, so they were not to be fooled. I'm joking. They're busy doing their clinical activities. So we're going to turn it over for our second talk to Dr. Alex Ramirez. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay? Is this working? All right. Let's begin. Thank you, Dr. Lozama, for those extremely kind words. And thank you for being here today in person. It really feels great to be, looking at each other, sharing together. I also placed this slide here with a bunch of animation and a lot going on in there, because we shouldn't really take ourselves too seriously. And we should also have fun as we learn. If we're not having fun, we're doing it wrong. And so if I'm making this not fun at some point, please stop me, okay? I have nothing to disclose. Here are our objectives for the lecture today. And we're going to touch on CGMs and autonomous insulin pump systems. We're going to highlight the improvements in that technology, discuss future prospects, the implementation of these technologies, and even consumer-grade systems. Now let's frame the problem. Diabetes is really only getting worse, and it's not just a rich country problem, it is affecting the whole wide world, poor and rich alike. The numbers are really staggering to the point that there is a new person with diabetes somewhere in the world every 2 seconds. For the US, it's every 26 seconds. Those are staggering statistics. In just 2024, we had 584 million people living with diabetes somewhere in the world. Just as a reference, less than a decade ago, the prediction had been 550 million for 2035. We reached 589 a decade earlier. So these numbers are actually only getting worse. So it is your collective job too, not just mine, all of us sharing the responsibility to do better in this area. And what's the bill? We're paying $1 trillion in 2024, and that amounts to about 12% of our global health expenditures. Can you guys hear me well in the back? That's a staggering amount of money. What did it buy us? It bought us 3.4 million deaths around the world. That is another staggering cipher. That is like the whole Tampa Bay extended metro area population plus half of Orlando's metro area dying every single year of one illness. And that is also about a death every 9 seconds. And on top of that, a full 20% of our new generation is getting exposure to hyperglycemia in utero. And that will continue the vicious cycle because those people have a much greater risk of developing diabetes during their lifetimes. So, any diabetics in the audience? Thank God, no, right? Well, this a bit of dark humor, right? And the reality is, all of these statistics I just mentioned, they tend to be just that, because unless somebody has died or really lives with horrible diabetes in the family, it's hard to really kind of put a face to it. But our patients that have insulin, that have to use insulin on a daily basis, they really know the fear of waking up in a puddle of sweat in the back of an ambulance because of severe hypoglycemia. And that fear drives their lack of compliance that we tend to judge in our offices all the time, and a lot of their defensive behaviors. And on top of that, diabetes is such a challenge. Here's just kind of in a nutshell, all the different things that make the sugars go up and down. It's kind of a mind-numbing, right? You see, from biology to food to medications and behaviors, everything can really make the sugars go all over the place. It becomes really unpredictable and chaotic. And it's almost like playing 4D chess in the middle of a hurricane while in the dark, right? It is just that difficult. So our patients, comes to no surprise, a lot of them get a little bit cynical or really get in despair or lose hope. So I'll ask this question because one of my patients keeps telling me every time I see him, "Doc, I'm not smart enough to be a diabetic." Every time we try to keep making adjustments to their devices or we try to help them adjust their own insulin, it's really a challenge to communicate that teaching to those people, right? And here in a nutshell as well, I put in all the different pressures over a human, right? Not just their illness, it's also the rest of their lives. That takes a lot of mental space. So about 15 years ago, the smartest endocrine scientists and engineers got together and came up with a plan to create the artificial pancreas project. They came up with this fancy slide, and there was a lot of planning and engineering design and so on. It was really difficult and challenging and ambitious. And just about a decade ago, it got simplified. And here are the steps. Step one, create a pump that in the face of hypoglycemia can stop itself. So the person at least doesn't end up severely low or dying from a low sugar. Step two, predict when the low is going to happen and stop the insulin actually before the low ever happens. Step three, automate insulin. I mean, that sounds like a big jump in my opinion. And then step 3B, or maybe step 4, would have been to create a multi-hormonal complex machine that delivered like a full pancreas, amylin, insulin, and glucagon. Well, that step 3B may not ever even be necessary because we are actually at the end of step 3A, where the algorithms and the machines that control diabetes have become so good that the prevention of hypoglycemia is almost a reality today. I'll pose this to the audience because I often actually wonder this myself, right? Some patients are actually so challenging, right? Sometimes it is so difficult to communicate with our patients that you often really wonder. And today's panorama of all the different technologies and medications that we use for diabetes has really gotten so complex that a lot of our primary care doctors are kind of just giving it up and say, just shift it to endocrine. I don't want to deal with all these different medicines and pills and shots and all that. But the reality is 90% of individuals with diabetes will only find a primary care doctor to treat their disease. So it is everybody's also collective job to learn these things and to implement them and use them. The most important thing, I think, the most important development step for diabetes advancement in the last maybe 20 years has been these technologies, the continuous glucose monitors. These machines have really empowered us so much. Here on the left is the Medtronic sensors. Next is the Dexcom G7. A lot of you may be familiar with that one. This one for sure you have seen, the Libre sensors, really the most widely prescribed CGMs in the world. And then here on the far right is the Eversense 365. That's an interesting little gadget, and we'll talk more about that in the next slides. What is a continuous glucose monitor? Well, it is a little machine, a tiny device, and the sensor has a small metal flexible filament that is deployed under the skin. That has multiple layers. The most important one is going to be this enzymatic layer that contains glucose oxidase. The same thing in finger sticks. And that enzyme, when it gets in contact with glucose, releases peroxide. And that peroxide leads to an electrical current that is measured by the innermost electrode. And that is proportional to the glucose available in the subcutaneous water. That is then transmitted via the transmitter device to a receiver, which in most cases is going to be either a pump device or actually for most of our patients, smartphones, right? Your pocket right now usually has a smartphone today that is capable of doing the miracle of measuring a biological molecule of glucose. That's pretty phenomenal. Now, we used to be kind of limited by certain things like Tylenol and aspirin or vitamin C causing false readings in those devices. But technological and engineering advancements, talking about material science advancements, have really led to these things being not that big a deal anymore. So occasionally we still have our COVID patient that decides to take 20 grams of vitamin C. That may still cause significant issues, but for the majority of instances, you will not have a problem. And then there's a new variant. That's the Eversense 365. This is a 1-year little sensor that is applied under the skin of the upper arm. It contains 2 little windows that have a hydrogel, the same material as the eye lenses. And those inside of that hydrogel are these fluorescent reactive molecules that can bind reversibly to glucose. And it also has that same enzyme, that glucose oxidase, for the calibration of the machine. And it has these diodes, these LEDs and photodiodes that emit a bit of light and then receive that light back from the fluorescent chemical in that little sensor. And with that, it gets you a pretty accurate reading as well. The device can last, again, a full year when implanted under the skin. And it's actually okay to get most MRIs with. Not the super high-end MRIs, but most other like low-grade MRIs, you can still have it without getting a little surgery to get it removed. Now, I keep talking about the interstitial fluid for a reason. There is a big difference between continuous glucose readings from interstitial water and blood glucose readings. Here's the difference. Well, if the sugar is staying steady, think of blood glucose as the locomotive, right? It's always ahead. It's telling you what's in front, all right? But the continuous glucose sensor is the back wagon, the last wagon, right? Eventually, it gets to the same place as the locomotive, right? But it takes time to get there. That is what we call the lag of the CGM. So when things are moving, you'll see how the locomotive here, it's the blood glucose, it's much higher than that of the last wagon, the continuous glucose reading. And so when things are moving again, yes, the CGM and the blood glucose will be significantly different. The CGM will get there eventually, all right? But that lag of time is an average of about 10 minutes. So it's really important that your patients learn this, that you guys are familiarized with this, that you just don't simply get flustered, that your patients are having difficulties with their differences in their readings. I could show you 50 slides of all the many clinical trials on CGMs and their impact in diabetes. But one actually suffices. This is the Commissaire. The Commissaire was a prospective 3-year study. It compared CGMs versus finger stick glucose readings. And it did so in patients using both insulin pumps, non-autonomous, right? Just dumb insulin pumps, manual insulin pumps, and multiple daily shots like Lantus and Novolog and what we do on a daily basis. In the 2 red lines here at the top, the patients using either a pump or an injection, doesn't matter which of the 2 is which because you can see there's no difference, right? These are the patients getting only blood glucose readings. So if all the information you have is a couple of times a blood glucose reading, you're going to be much more conservative. And those patients' A1Cs were a full about 1 point higher than the patients who had real-time continuous glucose readings, okay? In other words, whether you use a pump, a dumb pump, or a multiple daily injections, if you have a CGM, you can get up to a full point A1C lowering just because of that. The market for these devices is growing exponentially. This has exploded, all right? That's why you almost see everybody like at the gym and at the supermarket, you know, they'll be wearing their short sleeves and they'll have a little something hanging in there. That's usually a glucose device, right? There's also over-the-counter gadgets that will go in a minute. Now, these machines have gotten so exponentially higher that I think even this slide is falling short of the mark, all right? But it predicts that in less than a decade, we'll have a tripling of these machines. And my best guess is probably going to happen maybe 3 or 5 years sooner. So here's the take-home point. CGMs by themselves improve glucose control in your patients. They will lower your patients' A1Cs and the risk of severe hypoglycemia. And they also empowered us to develop these new additional, almost miraculous technologies of autonomous insulin pump systems. And the American Diabetes Association now recommends them for everybody who's on insulin, even if that is 1 single shot a day. There's still some people who are resistant to starting these machines, all right? Some of the holdouts, they're just people who fear something that is attached to their bodies. And for them, maybe trying something like the Eversense implantable thing that is a little bit less visible over the skin, that doesn't feel like they're tethered to something, may be potentially a way to break that resistance. And of course, it is also your responsibility to educate your patients and keep selling on this idea. These machines also provide a ton of data. And what do we do with that data? You have access to it. You are empowered, all right? What does that mean? You'll have access to an online platform, and in that online platform, you can see what's going on with your patients in great detail. That is, you'll have access to their statistics here at the top and very nice patterns of graphics, or what we call nowadays the ambulatory glucose profile. This report should be your best friend. And if you're not yet familiar with it, you must become really familiar with it, because this is better than looking at an A1C and at a set of labs these days. This is way more information, way more actionable. It is way safer, right? And everybody in the hospital, including the hospitalists and the residents and everybody, has access to this data. Anytime that you're admitting anybody in the emergency room, you should ask them for access to this. Everybody at the James Haley VA can get access freely, easily to our LibreView and Clarity platforms so that everybody can, again, every healthcare provider can get access to these. And if you still have questions how to do it, ask me later and I'll put you in. It's very easy to do so. And Dr. Regales and I actually led a project to make these widely available. So this ambulatory glucose profile has a top bar here that has all the statistics, all right? Gives you an average glucose, an estimated A1C, also known as GMI, and a glucose variability. It also gives you these bars. And these bars are super important because it gets you a new metric called time in range. Time in range is, in my opinion, sufficient to replace all A1Cs in patients who use these machines. Then it has this patterns graphic that will show you what is going on, and you can immediately infer what the sugar is doing, what the patient is missing, and so on. And then at the bottom are the individual daily tracings of the patients. So I made this bold claim about replacing A1Cs. Here's why. Time in range is proportional. It's fully proportional and linear with the A1C. Number two, it has a much greater resolution for the risk of complications. This is data from the DCCT EDIC study, the landmark study that informs how we treat type 1 diabetes today. It took more than 20 years to collect all this data. Now, with the time in range metric, with the A1C, you can make these bold, gross estimates that 1 percentage point in the A1C increases the risk of diabetic retinopathy by 30-something%. With this, you can actually see scale by scale, by every 10 percentage points on the time in range, the progression in the risk of multiple complications, and even of the different kinds of retinopathy. And that time in range, it's visualized in colors and beautiful, and your goal is going to be around 70% or higher for most people with diabetes, right? This is super useful. And you can now adjust and aim for very specific time in range targets. An often forgotten part of this report is the glycemic variability, but I will mention it here because it really bears an important truth, which is the risk of hypoglycemia correlates directly the more glycemic variability there is. So in this study, this is a large meta-analysis, it really confirmed that if a patient has a glycemic variability that is higher than this recommended 36%, the risk of hypoglycemia was more than double. Right? So patients have large fluctuations in their sugars, regardless of the glucose average. Even for those who have high glucose a lot of the time, still the risk of hypoglycemia and severe hypoglycemia is much greater. So reducing glycemic variability should be one of your most important goals when treating diabetes. Now let's get into some of these specific machines. I mentioned again the Eversense 365. It is this kind of innovative little gadget that is implanted in a short in-office procedure here in the back of the arm. It uses this transmitter that is a bit more conspicuous perhaps than that of the Libre and the Dexcom. So that's perhaps a deterrent. But this little gadget has its own little motor, so it vibrates. So when the patient is falling asleep and the whole thing, it will vibrate to awaken that patient because of a low sugar. So it's a really nice feature. They don't depend on hearing their phone alarms, for instance. Now, it has a pretty nice accuracy, and this metric here, the lower the number, the more accurate the sensor is. It still, however, requires calibrations. Calibrations are getting a finger stick every so often for this machine every 7 days. You have to calibrate it in order for the accuracy to remain. Then is the Dexcom G7. This is a fairly advanced technology, right? And it's currently integrated with most of our insulin pump systems. Most of your patients on pumps are going to be having a Dexcom G7 or G6 sensor. This device uses Bluetooth to connect to directly an Apple Watch, for instance, or an iPhone, and at the same time can send that information to the insulin pump if the patient is wearing a lot of these gadgets. All of these gadgets will get that signal. They're a little bit more expensive, about $232 per 3 sensors. That's a month's worth. Every sensor lasts 10 days, all right? It is also the fastest one to start working. It takes only 30 minutes before your first reading shows up. It tends to be not as accurate on day 1, 2, or 3, and then for the next 7 days, it does become pretty accurate. And then finally, our workhorse. This is the Freestyle Libre 3. It is the most widely prescribed sensor in the world, and I think it tops Dexcom by, I don't know, tenfold probably. Why is it? Because it is the most accurate. So remember, the lower the number, this is the lowest. This is the best-in-class, most accurate sensor in the world right now, and it requires no calibration. It is also pretty accurate since day 1, all right? Now, you can wear it for a full 15 days, which is very nice, and it's so small, it is the diameter of 1 penny and the thickness of 2 stacked pennies. Now, this machine does take 60 minutes, as I mentioned, and it is now starting to work with some pumps. There is one pump in the market which connects directly with this sensor at the moment. So, you know, it's also one of the cheapest ones, and it's probably the main reason why it's so widely adopted. So here's in a nutshell a summary of all their features. I won't bore you reading them, but I will again mention that this Libre 3 is the only one that doesn't require any calibrations. Even the Dexcom G7 doesn't require calibrations, but it is suggested that you do it in the first couple of days, again, to improve the accuracy. The Medtronic Guardian 4 sensor requires calibrations frequently, about every 5 days, and the Eversense once a week. Now, these devices, again, collect a ton of data, and that data can be used for many things. So there's now an ecosystem of apps that can now be utilized and leveraged to provide a lot of new features. For instance, the Dexcom app now has this AI, little photograph thing where you can take a photo of your plate. Like, for instance, you can take your pizza photograph there, and it'll give you a guess, an estimate of the number of carbs in that pizza so that a person with diabetes can dose their insulin more accurately. In addition to that, these companies have come up with over-the-counter, like commercially available, like no prescription glucose sensors. We're talking about something called Stelo for Dexcom and Lingo for the Libre. They look, this one, you see how it looks almost exactly the same as the Dexcom, just a little bit darker, and it comes with a very nice app. Now, it also comes with, again, a whole environment of apps. And so this thing is kind of taking, the job of the doctor. Again, anybody can just buy these things for about $100 a month or a little less. And the app will give the patient this learn feature, which gives them their patterns of their sugars. And with those patterns, patients can then start changing their behaviors. So that can actually be really useful if done correctly. And on top of that, it has this spike detection, which gives them actionable data. So whenever somebody eats a really big meal, these devices, by the way, do not have any alarms. So your friend who has type 1 diabetes and cannot afford glucose sensors, if they buy one of these sensors, if they have a very low sugar, that type of thing, they will not get any alarms, okay? But they may get later a notification, you shouldn't have eaten that kind of a thing, right? And go for a walk. Walk it off, right? Stay hydrated. Again, do not fall short of the mark. Lingo, which is the Abbott version of the Freestyle Libre 3, actually it runs on the platform of the Libre 2, which is a little larger. But anyways, this device is also over the counter, about $80 a month or $90 a month. Again, it gives a very nice feature of environments, and it gives suggestions depending on the patterns of sugars for food and exercise and so on. So they're all really going aggressively after this consumer market. And I think the world is changing rapidly because your patients are going to come into you telling you, Doc, my sugar's high, right? Even before you ever did an A1C or any screening for them, they're going to tell you, Doc, do something, help me. So here's some take-home points. Number one, again, CGMs will dramatically improve that time in range and hyperglycemia. They will also be applicable now that we have these commercial sensors in prevention of diabetes. And I want you to make an analogy here. These things are a dramatic change in technology. They're not just better glucose meters. They are 10 times better or more than any previous technology. So they're here to stay, they're here to disrupt. Little pause here. Move on to the artificial pancreas project, right? And the goal has always been to create an algorithm that closes the loop. You get a signal of glucose, the machine interprets it, and gives you enough insulin to keep the sugars how they should be. Wash and repeat. You get more sensing and more information, better control. Here on the left, in this meme, right, is the original prototype of an insulin pump. This is the Medtronic Backbreaker 1000. It came back with a free visit to the chiropractor right after it. No, I'm just kidding. It's the Odyssey range, the Medtronic Odyssey range. It led to the development of the first insulin pumps about 40 years ago. But look how it is today. You know, elegant simplicity. And here's, in a nutshell, the two kind of different methods of infusing insulin. On the left here, tubed pumps. On the right, tubeless pumps. This is kind of how the market is currently splitting, right? Currently, we only have one brand of fully tubeless devices, but everybody's moving in that direction to compete, right? Because that's what patients want. They don't want necessarily something clunky and potentially disrupting of their lives. They want some elegance and simplicity in them. Here's what the old paradigm of diabetes used to be. CGMs were non-functional or inexistent, and really patients ended up hating and stopped using them because they really were kind of worthless machines at the beginning, or they, again, weren't even available. They were wired and slow to download. The doctors really had almost no information to make decisions. So it was, you know, when Natalia and I were in fellowship, it was a guessing game for all of this information, right? And we didn't even have the ability to download these machines at the hospital. So we're constantly guessing. These days, it's all software defined rather than hardware defined. And what is the best example of software defined devices? Your smartphones. So in a similar fashion, these machines are software defined, fully connected, integrated with CGMs. They're small, inconspicuous, waterproof, quite resistant devices. They're getting upgrades constantly, meaning every few weeks or every few months, even through the difficulties of the regulatory paths of the FDA, they're getting free upgrades to these devices, making them safer and better. And they're lasting longer. 7 days wear now for the Medtronic system. And carb counting is becoming a thing of option. So let's briefly talk about the different pumps in the US market. Here's the Omnipod 5. Again, it's pretty elegant and quite an attractive product. I think it's very popular. In my opinion, this is most popular with young and active individuals. And it really has the potential of breaking the resistance to initiate automation in your most difficult patients. So I do not dismiss it out of hand. About a third of patients using these devices actually have type 2 diabetes. So it's actually getting very popular with type 2s as well. It has an algorithm that, in my opinion, is a bit lackluster, but it does provide improvement in time in range and A1C. The real-world results for the meta-analysis of this product, 68% time in range average. But again, in my opinion, the algorithm still kind of lags or trails behind stronger, better algorithms as offered in other pumps that we're about to see. The interface is a little buggy, and they've had kind of all the problems in the world into getting it fully functional. But nowadays, it's actually working fairly well. Here's kind of in a nutshell, a snapshot of my own practice here at the VA, right? And so my patients are getting, A1Cs and like time in ranges all over the place. Some are really poor. Some are actually quite awesome in the 80s, right? But like the majority are also in the 60s, I would say. Here's like this is one of my prototypical, really excellent type 1 patient on this machine. They still have broad fluctuations, patterns of highs, patterns of lows. They still struggle quite a bit with this machine, but it works, right? This patient's time in range is not bad at 70%, meeting the exact metric I was mentioning, and they're not having too many lows. So the machine does work. Here's kind of another prototypical of my patients here. This is a patient who's using type 2 diabetes, that has type 2 diabetes and is using the device. All over the place again, some patterns of highs, some patterns of lows. overall doing okay, right? 60% time in range. And this is the tandem pumps. We have two devices in the market. One is the tandem T-Slim, and the other one is the tandem Mobi, this tiny little device here that is quite similar and competes directly with Omnipod as an almost tubeless device. I say almost because it does have a tiny little tube of about 2 inches in length. Now, this device is fully integrated with a phone, so the patients can fully hide it and just take all of their boluses directly from the screen of their smartphone. Their algorithm is also pretty good and delivers a time in range increase a little bit greater than that of Omnipod, between 11 and 12%, for A1C's reductions that are very similar to the competition. Here's a prototypical of my patients with type 1 diabetes. So you can notice they still have some excursions, but it's a little bit flatter, right? We still maybe one pattern a day of high readings, time in ranges that are not perfect, but pretty damn good. And here's a prototypical type 2 diabetic, who's wearing this device. So a type 2 can do amazing on these machines. If they're like following a relatively steady diet and getting their stuff together, the algorithm can be good enough to get these amazing numbers. And then we also have this Beta Bionics product. This is the newest entrant to the competition, the Beta Bionics iLet, Bionic Pancreas. It's also a pretty elegant, kind of really beautiful device. They are leading in interoperability. As soon as every sensor comes into the market, they immediately adopt it. Like within days or weeks, they roll out a software update on their phone that directly connects to the pump, and immediately the pump is better and now accepts the new device, requires no cables to get the software upgrades. I love that portion of it. It's also very, very disruptive because not only it has a relatively strong algorithm, but it's also the one and only pump that doesn't require your patients to learn carb counting. That's a big deal because forever and ever, every patient who needed to be on a pump had to learn how to count carbs. For this device, for the first time, not counting carbs was an option. All they need to do is announce that they're eating a medium, small, or large meal, and that's all they need to do. Now, if they fail to do that, they may not get as good a control. So the algorithm, again, sometimes falls off the mark of being fully autonomous, but if they announce this pump works really great and doesn't require that carb counting portion of things. So I think this is the most disruptive product because that also means that any of you can prescribe it, meaning doesn't require a specialist because I don't have to do fancy math to prescribe this device. All I have to do is kind of put my signature on it, and that's really it, all right? You don't have to create carb ratios and correction factors or sliding scales, and no fancy math is required to prescribe this device. So most primary care doctors will be able to use it. It doesn't have yet an approval for type 2, but it soon will get it. Here's a snapshot of my own clinic here. Most of my patients start over here, and you can see them converging to a pretty tight control between 6.9 and 7.4. Not bad, right? And here's another prototypical of my patients. This patient had a very pronounced dawn phenomenon here, right? I could never control his dawn phenomenon, so I ended up putting him on a pump just because of that. His time in range before the pump, he's an excellent patient. He was taking all these shots and everything, but his time in range was low at 56%. On this device, now he runs 66%, a full 10 points higher, exactly like the clinical trials are showing. The dawn phenomenon is not completely gone, but is way better, and the glucose control over the 24 hours is excellent. And again, this patient didn't have to learn to count carbs. That's pretty phenomenal. And finally, the Medtronic 780G, in my opinion, has the most advanced algorithm. Now, this device provides time in range that on average in real-world studies is 75%. That is beating the recommended targets from the FDA. It uses a really clunky old sensor, but they just cut out a deal with Abbott to use the Freestyle Libre 3, although they modified and rebranded it. So it's going to be like their exclusive deal, and they're probably going to surcharge us for it. But regardless, it's going to have the best sensor in the market with a very nice algorithm. It's still kind of really ugly and like big and heavy and the whole thing, but it does have, in my opinion, the most advanced algorithm backed by the evidence. Here is that evidence. If you use the recommended user settings, in over 1,000 patients, you can get a time in range of like 81%. That is, again, beating the expectation from the FDA, from the ADA by 10 full points. And that means the risk of complications is really that much lower. You also see that the risk of hypoglycemia is the same, almost the same for everybody. And this is for all users on this device, time in range of 76%. That's not bad. This is one of my patients. This guy had pancreatic diabetes. If you've ever seen a patient with pancreatic diabetes, those patients that survive severe pancreatitis, they're like the worst, right? They come in all the time to the hospital. They're never controlled. They're very afraid of the insulin. They get a lot of hypoglycemia. This is exactly him, right? And so he was always in DKA. He was admitted once a month to the hospital. When we finally got him to learn to count carbohydrates, this is him today. Look at that beautiful control. 69% time in range versus previously barely 13%. That's dramatic. What does he have to do? He barely announces a couple of meals a day. That's it. He just keeps it full of insulin and runs it all day, calibrates his sensor, once a week or so, and he gets this amazing control. Here's the same list of my own patients. You can see how the numbers are quite staggering. A lot of 80s, 70s, 90% on this machine. That's very impressive control. The ones that are in the 40s are usually patients who just refuse to wear their sensor because, again, the sensor is not the best. So some patients just decide, I'm not going to wear this sensor. I hate it. I'm going to wait until the other sensor comes out. And so they get poor control as a consequence. How does the algorithm work? So this is specifically for the Medtronic, but in reality, most of these pumps have a variation of this same thing. So number one is the basal modulation. The pump gets a signal from the CGM and automatically changes the rate of infusion every 5 minutes. On top of that, it delivers auto corrections. For the Medtronic, as soon as it detects the sugars are going up, it delivers 100% of like a sliding scale dose every 5 minutes. It will do it up to 12 times an hour. That's a lot of little microboluses to prevent the sugar from going out of control. So it stops it in its tracks and brings that sugar back down. If the patient eats a large meal, it also has a third layer of algorithmic correction that they call meal detection technology. Medtronic is the only one that has this extra layer of algorithmic correction. All the other ones, however, do have some automatic boluses to help with glucose corrections. But this extra layer basically gives an extra dose of insulin when it detects with a high degree of confidence that the sugar has gone out of control because of food. And what it does then is, again, delivers more insulin to bring that sugar faster under control without losing time in range as much. And finally, it has an extra layer of safety, meaning every bolus goes through this safety check. And if the pump's algorithm detects that whatever the patient entered may cause hypoglycemia within the next 2 hours, and again, this machine, it's constantly looking 2 hours into the future, predicting lows and highs. And as a consequence, it gives, potentially better glucose control. So with that, with all those layers of algorithmic control, unannounced meals of up to 60 grams of carbohydrate, meaning patients missed the bolus and they ate 60 grams of carbohydrate. That's like a full meal, all right, for the hospital, right? And in those patients, that didn't lead to an increase in time in range greater than 250. So yes, the sugars did go up, but they didn't spend a whole lot of time above 250. And number two, for patients who eat a small snack and totally didn't announce anything on the pump, 20 grams of carbohydrate had no impact on time in range. On top of that, these machines are now coming with this new extended wear reduction. This is also exclusive to Medtronic at the moment, but every company is working on their variation of this, which means that we will have all pumps likely lasting for 7 days or longer. So potentially up to 10 days of wear if the reservoir of insulin holds enough. That has led to a significant reduction in the rate of occlusions. And please know this, if ever you see somebody with DKA in the hospital and they had a pump, it's usually because they had an occlusion. So the occlusion is the bane of the existence of patients on pumps. So reducing that rate of occlusion is also reducing your burden everywhere. And that even leads to a small time in range improvement, which may be significant. Here's in a nutshell a summary of the battle for the algorithm supremacy in these devices, all right? And again, at the top, in my opinion, is currently the Medtronic algorithm that leads to a greater time in range increase. This is from, again, real life studies, all right? 11% for Tandem and Beta Bionics, and 9 to 10% for Omnipod. Many challenges still remain. Perhaps top in mind is the exercise-induced hypoglycemia. Patients, of course, want to exercise. You keep telling them they gotta exercise more, so they go and do it. And as they start working out, that insulin that's been deposited subcutaneously gets an increase in blood flow. As a consequence, there is relative hyperinsulinemia, which leads to gluconeogenesis inhibition. So low glucose output, greater insulin levels in the bloodstream, higher utilization of glucose lead to major episodes of hypoglycemia. So what are people trying to do about it? This is an in silico study, meaning this is a simulation study trying to get multivariate algorithms to work. They use an Apple Watch device that detects automatically the exercise. You know how your Apple Watch, if anybody here has ever worn one, if you start exercising and you didn't signal that you're working out, it asks you, are you working out? It detects automatically that you're exercising. Why? Because your heart rate goes up and you're getting more motion on it. And so with that, it activates an automatic algorithm that goes through this MPC controller and reduces insulin release. And it closes the loop with a continuous glucose sensor, right, for more accurate insulin release. In this small study, again, this was an in vitro simulation study, it reduced the rate of hypoglycemia significantly. So multiple groups are now trying to implement similar ways of doing it. Now, most pumps have some form of exercise mode, but the reality is most people don't really use them because they don't work all that well. So we need these technologies to continue evolving. Another big challenge is pregnancy and insulin requirements. There's no pump in the US market that is approved for diabetes management, and yet we have like no better options. We put these patients on injections and they do terribly. You give them pills and you're fearing the worst. So there's really no good solution for this problem yet, but many people are trying to work on this, and it's also everybody's here responsibility to keep pushing this forward. And of course, our team and our next generations. Remember, during pregnancy, higher sugars will lead to a higher risk of preeclampsia. And there's a bigger risk here, or a bigger complication, which is the targets for glucose control are much tighter. You're supposed to get these patients between 63 and 140. That's a really narrow and very low range. So your patients quickly get a bunch of low sugars and they hate you for it. On top of that, they get these very dramatic changes. In the first trimester, they need 20% less insulin. But by the end of their pregnancy, they're needing up to 3 times more insulin. That makes it extremely challenging. So we need more advanced algorithms to actually work on this. There are multiple trials working on this, but again, a lot of work is still necessary. These devices are getting popular with both type 1s and type 2s. That's why I got the fat guy with the skinny girl there. The benefits actually expand to both conditions almost equally. And most of these pumps are working on getting those approvals. So most pumps currently work on both devices, on both types of disease. And not only that, diabetes is getting fully into popular culture. So now even Barbie is wearing a pump and a CGM. Look at that. How cute is that? Finally, I'd be remiss not to mention that there are many in the world who decided that they wouldn't wait for the FDAs and regulatory approvals of the world to get them access to the latest and greatest technology. And they themselves took to heart the challenge, and they hacked into their insulin pumps and created code algorithms that would aggressively control their sugars. This has been a community project for the last 15 years, and it's actually gotten to significant fruition, all right? And I don't have a single patient that does this, but many of my colleagues out in the community have seen this. You can actually hack into the iPhone. Actually you have to pay basically Apple like $100 fee to become a developer, and what you do is you download the code that's already available, and the latest version is actually equivalent or even superior to that algorithm offered by Medtronic. But it allows you to kind of hack into older pump devices and make the algorithm be more customizable to the individual's needs. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this to any of you, but I just want you to know this is out there, right? And it's usually, again, a hack device. But I mention it because there's a brand new pump called Twist that is coming into the market this fall. That machine uses the version 1 of this algorithm. So basically, a nonprofit took this algorithm and got it into clinical trials and proved that it was safe and effective. And then the FDA granted them the approval. So now this free algorithm can be actually used by anyone, right? And not only that, there's already a product, a commercial product that uses it. So my best guess is in a few years, we may actually see some more of these versions of the algorithm to be tested publicly so that we can have like an open version of these devices that hopefully will also make access to these more accessible, more affordable. In development are other interesting machines. This is the GlucoTrack continuous blood glucose monitor. This is like a pacemaker. Look at that. It is inserted in the subclavian vein, right? So you put this in the subclavian vein like a pacemaker. This device goes subcutaneously into the skin, again like a pacemaker, and it provides continuous glucose readings every 5 minutes. And it could potentially integrate with insulin pumps and so on. I don't know if this is like the way of the Concord, a technology that is amazing, but never really doesn't succeed because, it's actually not necessary. And I mean, the Freestyle Libre 3 and all these other gadgets are really so good that maybe this actually never is necessary. But it's interesting to actually see them. But on top of that, these companies are also coming up with biosensors, they call them. Why? Because they're going to be able to measure more than one thing. Ketones, for instance, but they can also measure things like alcohol and lactate. And everybody's going to want to have one of those gadgets because they may actually change how you exercise or how you even socialize. The talk about these machines also gets to the same conversation when we talk about phones and always having your earpods. And we're embedded in technology these days, and we have changed as a species today. So are we no longer Homo sapiens but Homo cyberneticus? Anyways, I'll leave that philosophical question for you guys. We also have other devices such as the InPen smart device. We also have the Bigfoot Unity devices. These are pen caps that you put on top of an insulin pen and helps you keep a better track of the glucose and connects to an app and so on. The Bigfoot Unity, I don't find it to be all that useful. The InPen is a little bit smarter because it uses a cartridge of insulin, so it uses Novolog or Humalog, fast-acting insulins, and it connects directly to an app, and then the app tracks the active insulin. The active insulin refers to when was your last correction, your last bolus, so that if the patient is still a high sugar, it'll prevent the patient from overdosing in the next few hours. Okay? And so the guidelines from the FDA are now recommending these devices for type 1 and type 2. But that also leads to the potential overprescription trap. What is that? These devices are shiny objects. They're very costly. And people say, oh, you're putting me on insulin? Don't put me on insulin. Just give me the latest pump. That's all I need. In reality, many of your patients may actually be much better off taking a healthy diet, exercise, doing maybe a GLP-1 if necessary, lose weight, prevent ever needing the insulin in the first place rather than going for the shiny, expensive object. These pumps, they pump insulin, not miracles. There's also apps that help you and your patients control and carry and track your sugar control. And there's a lot of work in additional features. Remember how I mentioned the Apple Watch can actually detect exercise? Well, with a 72% accuracy, this little app can help patients remember that they missed a bolus. So that can, there's another little helping feature for people to improve their adherence or their announcements on their insulin pumps that are still limited. The future is bright. You know, this is the twist pump that I was mentioning before. The Tandem company is coming out with this. Medtronic and Tandem are both coming out with tubeless devices. This is the Tandem Sigi or Sigi. Sigi is a reusable pump as compared to the Omnipod that is fully disposable. And they're coming out hopefully in the next year or two. My future predictions, this is again pure speculation, is that deep neural networks will use all the data, will create foundational artificial intelligence models that will gather all of that data that we're collecting from these devices and create very intelligent multi-layer networks that fully predict a person's individual glucose and can provide much better control. So here's kind of in a nutshell how these algorithms have worked. In the earlier years, we were really kind of in our infantile age. This is in the 2013s to 2017 with our earlier pumps. And then we had some experimental devices that use this, you know, like the whole 9000. It's still not the best AI, but, you know, create important developments. Nowadays, we're like in the Jarvis era, where most of our patients are getting model predictive control algorithms and excellent glucose control as a fact. And then the future is something like the overarching, you know, Skynet, something that really can control the full world. All right, there's still some fears, right? These devices can be expensive. They can cause, you know, the algorithms can have some challenges, device compatibility, data risks, etc. And anyways, I think time is almost up. GLP-1s may actually also provide an extra layer of control for our patients. This is a study that used pramlintide, but GLP-1s actually do the same thing. Notice how the sugar control was the best in those patients who got these devices. The future, again, is bright. More devices. There's a healthy market out there for these companies, and I expect to see much more development. The final slide here is for this last publication in the New England Journal about allogeneic islet cell transplant that didn't require immunosuppression. We can now hack into these cells and create these very interesting HIP cells that completely evade the immune system and produce a sustained release of insulin. This is still, of course, in early stages, but coupled with scalable islet cell production in factories, we could potentially see a cure for diabetes, not through machines, but maybe through biology or transplants. All right, and I'll take any questions. Thank you so much for your attendance.
Question, and then other questions, please direct to Dr. Ramirez online by either you'll look at the chat or email him. But Dr. Shiroki, please ask your question.
I have three questions.
Okay, good.
They kind of all sort of go together. So I'm a general internist, and I find like a lot of my patients get these now who are on GLP-1s and SGLT2s, and it's easy in general internal medicine because you can sort of set it and forget it. It's just lifestyle responses to it. But I